Thanks so much for listening to No Lions Here with me, Big Panda. Everybody, welcome back to No Lions Here. My name is Big Panda, and I'm a recovering sex addict. On today's show, I would like to welcome back Melissa Killeen. Melissa is a seasoned recovery coach and author of the pioneering book, Recovery Coaching, a guide to coaching people in recovery from addictions. Drawing from extensive experience in recovery coaching and the development of recovery community organizations, RCOs, Melissa shares her wealth of knowledge. As a master's degree holder in executive coaching and organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania, she has crafted a unique model that seamlessly integrates executive coaching with recovery coaching. Former president of Recovery Coaches International, Melissa received the prestigious Vernon Johnson Award in 2015, a national certified professional recovery support specialist, and a CCAR trained recovery coach. And Melissa still currently resides in Southern New Jersey. How are you, Melissa? Welcome back to No Lions Here.
I am very happy to be back. Thank you very much.
We are excited to have you back. And if you haven't checked out my first episode with Melissa, great episode. Definitely go check that out. I don't remember what number that was, but her name is in the headlines. So definitely go check that out. It's cool, Melissa, before we kind of jump in today's topic of like enmeshed relationships. So I started my courses to become a recovery coach. And on one of our slides, I took a picture of it. One of our slides was, I think it was a page from your book. And down at the bottom, it had you, Melissa Killeen, and like the name of the book in there. And I thought that was so cool. I took a picture of it. I'll have to send it to you. So yeah, super excited to have you back.
Thank you. Well, you know what? Like, tell me, and I'll send some books over to your class.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna get you in touch with the program director over there.
Great.
Yeah, they're doing a great job. We finish up classes here in December, and then I start interning in January. So really excited for that. I got to do 300 hours of interning with a local treatment center. So, and then by June I should be done and be ready to test for it. So I'm really excited. It's definitely a little overwhelming, that's for sure. Just trying to juggle everything, balance for me. I think in any addict's life, trying to balance recovery and then the new opportunities that come from recovery, I find is definitely pretty challenging for me. And it brings up a lot, and it's all good stuff, right? It's all things that I need to be looking at and working on, but sometimes it's hard to navigate, that's for sure.
I hear you.
Yeah. So today we got you back on. We want to talk some enmeshed relationships. So, I've kind of shared my story of being a Mother Enmeshed Man and kind of what that's looked like for me in my life. And, last time I had you on, you kind of mentioned that you were an enmeshed parent to your son. So really excited to have this opportunity to talk about your experience with this, because I know my experience, and I know I've talked to other guys in the program that were also Mother Enmeshed Men, but I have not actually gotten a chance to talk to, an enmeshed parent and also someone who is in recovery as well. So I think that this is a great opportunity and a great topic to talk about. So I definitely want to hear, your side of things and what that looked like for you and how you were able to overcome that, and what your relationship with your son looks like today.
Well, I do remember that conversation, and the reason we got onto it is that you gave me a link to one of your previous podcasts with a therapist, specifically talking about Mother Enmeshed Men, and I was floored. I learned so much about that, characteristic, that I just started deep diving into it. And I forgot the fellow's name, but it just I didn't realize there was so much work being done into it and how much it had affected men. I had a small amount because when I would share my story in the rooms, there were always 3 or 4 men that were like, I am a mother enmeshed male, and this was the first time I ever heard from a mother that enmeshed her son. And it was amazing. And that at least gave me the confidence to keep telling that story because, again, I shared with you, it was very hard for me to call myself a perpetrator, mostly of my son, because I was so shamed by that. And the more times I shared that story, the more times I saw the impact, how much it had helped others in the room, the more I realized that, yes, I'm a wounded person. Yes, I have wounded others. Yes, I'm taking responsibility for that. And I was able then to identify I am a perpetrator and I perpetrated my son with this behavior. And honestly, Alec, that took 5 years to come to that point of being able to say the word, I am a perpetrator. And I was already in the program 10 years. So when we talk about recovering, I just celebrated October 14th, 20 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
We're always in that process. We're always in that process. You know, peeling the onion is like, I don't know when I'm going to get to the core. But it's definitely one of those situations that I am still working on it.
Yeah. What were those, I've found that the later in recovery I get, like the things that come up, I'm not so afraid of them, right? Like I feel like early on in recovery, realizing like basically like looking at my life and going, oh my God, there's so much that I have to work on. Oh my gosh, I'm never gonna like. But now I've noticed that, and I'm only, it'll be 3 years from me in January that I'm like, okay, like it's not so daunting anymore. Was that it for you when you kind of came across this, or was it like, oh my God, I still have so much I got to do?
Well, I think when I was in your situation in the very beginning, I had a very thoughtful therapist who said, are you ready to dedicate 5 years to this? Because it will take you 5 years to get to the point where the craving starts to lessen. And of course, at that time, 5 years was like saying it's a millennium. It was like, It could have been 1,000 years. It was way too long. I want what I want when I want it. But what I did realize is along the lines, because I went through the process of physical sex addiction, then I discovered love addiction. And then I started seriously diving into love addiction. And that's where I realized the enmeshment factor. My enmeshment with my son was actually a form of my love addiction. That was an aha moment. What kind of year that came in was definitely after 10 years, and so it's a process, and my process is going to be different from your process, and my process is going to be different from your listener's process. And I'm waiting for a pill. I'm waiting for an injection to make it an easier, softer way, but
until then, we just got to keep doing what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm still an addict. That's basically what I'm saying. I'm still looking for an easier, softer way.
Still, aren't we all? Yeah, amen. Amen to that. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So now, as far as the enmeshment with your son goes, what did that look like for you? What did that look like for you?
So as I said, it was a form of my love addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to go back to pretty much the same story of the formation of my sex addiction. I was trying to fill a hole in my heart. I came from two emotionally absent parents who loved me. I know. I had a roof over my head. I had clothes. I had my college education was paid for, middle class, upper middle class, everything that I needed. No wants or desires except for love.
Mm.
I never got the hugs. I never got the, you're a great person. I never got the things that in this hole in my heart was wanting. So that was a void. And what filled that void was whatever addiction came along, whether it be drugs, alcohol, food, sex, love. So as I was going, even as an adult, and I had my son when I was 34 years old. So, I was an older parent, and my marriage was okay, but it was one of those marriages that we decided maybe we should have a dog or a child,
Mm.
and boom, all of a sudden I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't really not a decision, but, it just happened. And so pretty much I think it was a decision, maybe this will save my marriage, whether it's a dog or a child, talk about a haphazard choice. And it didn't. We did not divorce until my son was 11 years old. But from his conception, it wasn't a loving, caring marriage. We were on separate paths. At the same time, we were running a business together. We were working together 24/7, whether it was at home or whether it was at work. So we were enmeshed. My husband and I were enmeshed. But emotionally available to each other, absolutely not. We took work home. We were workaholics. Everything was work. And it was a family business. So it was generational. Even when we went to grandma's house, what did we talk about? Work, the business. So, that continued, even though they were emotionally, a vibrant family, but because everyone was just so involved with work, and in essence, workaholism is another addiction, the emotional absence just was continuing. I did not receive the love that I wanted. My husband was a sex addict himself. He was having multiple affairs. I was totally aware of it. I was a child of the 60s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. To me, it was like a precursor of a polyamorous relationship. He gets what he wants. It doesn't impede on my situation. We're a company that had a lot of expos and fairs in other cities and in other countries, and he would handle that. And I would stay home and take care of the business at home and take care of my son. So I didn't see what was going on over there, and I chose not to because I had everything I wanted. I had a house. I had a house at the beach. I had a foreign car. My son went into private school. I had, paid my bills on time, blah, blah, blah. Except one thing, love. And what do you think is the perfect thing for that hole in my heart? The unconditional love of a child. And here I might, choke up, because talk about perpetration on an unknowing victim. Now, I can look back. My son is now 35 years old, and I can look back and see, what I did and all that stuff, and we're working on that. He's in therapy. I've gone in and we've had this session with Mom a few times. But for the most part, I can look back and see, just as any person who has gone through a recovery, man, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And so I can see how I perpetrated an unknowing victim there. And for the fact that it was my son really chokes me up. But I have to be honest, it wasn't until our separation in which we decided that we'd send my son to a child psychiatrist to help him adjust to the changes. And when you work with a child psychiatrist, one, he meets with the kid. Another week, he meets with mom. The next week, he meets with dad. Then he meets with mom and dad. And then he goes back and meets with the kid, and the cycle starts all over again. So guess what? Who needs the therapy more? Mom and dad and them together. You know?
Yep.
Because somebody has to go in with the kid, and they have to be all on the same page.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband said at the time, you have to speak to this psychiatrist because you're enmeshed with your son. And that's the first time I heard of it. And that was and we separated in 2000. So that was 23 years ago. Had not heard that term ever. Enabled, yes. Enmeshed, I didn't know that much about it. But I also at that time was not in recovery. So I went into recovery 4 years after that. And for the most part, through that psychiatric care, I learned more about my role in this enmeshment process. Not as much as I would get from a one-on-one therapist, but more, how can I protect my son, which was our main goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I really started being very aware. Now he was 11. Prior to 11, the kid had, every morning his clothes were laid out for him. At 11. I used to tie his shoes. When we went skiing, I carried all his gear. I put his shoes in the skis, buckled them up. I mean, when friends came over, I didn't let them go out and play. I got them in the canoe and I taught them how to canoe, and then we taught them how to bait fish. And, I was like over them like glue. It was disgusting. Now that I see that, I'm embarrassed by how enmeshed I was. Helicopter parent, it was more like pomegranate maple syrup.
Yeah.
It's like sticky and all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, the only saving that I got out of it, that I was just unaware of my behavior. What was driving me was the same thing that drives a heroin addict. I wanted that warm hug.
Mm-hmm.
And that hole in my heart needed to be filled. And nothing was better than that hug from my son. Because that warmed my child within. And that was what was driving my bus.
Yeah. 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 You brought up some really good points there, just around because I also, growing up, everything was taken care of, right? Like I had a roof over my head. I had nice clothes on my back. I was able to do the things that I wanted to do. And I thought, oh, wow, I've got everything I need. I've got a really good childhood. My parents are still together. Like, I know that for me, that was like I took a lot of pride in that growing up, was that my parents are still together. Oh, wow. It wasn't until years later that I realized they shouldn't really have been together, because there really wasn't anything going on there between them. And now that, getting into recovery, realizing from the outside looking in, I had the white picket fence. I had a good childhood, but really it lacked that love. It lacked that attunement, that, my emotional needs were not met. And it was like, I would have, obviously I try not to live in the past as far as like what, but I would have traded all the nice clothes to get that love and emotional attunement that I really needed, and that what I craved. And then growing up, still trying to crave that, but not knowing how to get that, then insert sex. And then, like you said, that's just the driving factor of like, okay, how do I get the love and attention and attunement and validation that I didn't get when I was a kid? Well, I'll just short circuit it. And if I can get somebody to sleep with me, that'll do. That'll be good enough. So, how it
So
starts
true.
is, yeah.
And I can't criticize my parents, because even though there's not a lot of studies on it, this has been passed down through the
Mm-hmm.
generations. And my parents grew up in the Depression. They were born in 1925. They were 10, 11, and 12 during the Depression. They had nothing. Their family survived on one chicken a week. And so that idea of having a pair of new shoes was pretty unbelievable. And so material things were extremely important for them to give to their children. And unfortunately, my parents were both sides were brought up in alcoholic households. So the emotional availability wasn't there at all either. So you couple that with, what do you give them? You give them material things. And that's what I got. That's what I got. And of course, as I said, that's what made me happy in the relationship, because I was given all these material things: the car, the house, the private school, the credit cards, everything materially. But that didn't fill that hole in my
Yep.
heart. The unusual aspect, and I find this very difficult even today when I'm working with other sex and love addicts, is to identify the emotions of love and empathy. And that is in itself a continuing source of being in touch with what is love and empathy. And it is very interesting. Of course, it doesn't mean physical sex at all.
Yep.
It's hard as adults and I'm just saying I'm working with sex and love addicts, but I haven't gone to the general population and asking them that same question. But it is hard for the population that I'm working with to identify what is love and empathy for them, and what does that look like, and how can we cultivate it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to think about. I know that to think about that in my own life too. Empathy. I didn't hear that word until I got into recovery. I had no idea what that word was, what it meant. I thought maybe people were just mispronouncing sympathy. Yeah, but empathy was a word that was very, very foreign to me. Luckily, today in my life now, I know what that looks like. I know what that feels like. And also too, backtracking just a little bit there, I think that for addicts in recovery, it's important. Not, I wouldn't say that I've spent a lot of time upon it, but looking back on our family tree, when were our parents raised? What era were they raised in? What era were their parents raised in? That gives you an idea of what gets passed down the line, because this stuff definitely does. Generational trauma is something that definitely gets passed on and passed on and passed down. So if anybody listening hasn't looked into their family tree, I'd highly suggest just giving it a glance over and just looking at the years and where mental health was in those years and when they grew up, and what did they go through the depression? Were they at war when they were growing up? And that'll tell you a lot about how they were raised and essentially how they passed down and how they raised their kids as well. I think that can be a big piece.
Well, it's a very good point, because Gabor Mate, who is the physician from Vancouver, and outspoken advocate of trauma and how it has affected addiction, speaks of himself being 2 years old when the Nazis invaded his country. And he left, his family left, but he was 2 years old. And one of the stories that he tells in his one of his TED Talks is that his mother called up the physician while they were in Hungary at the time. And she said, "Doctor, my child is always crying. I can't calm him down." And he said, "Mrs. Mate, all of the Jewish children are crying."
Mm.
And so Gabor Mate said it was because the 2-year-old and under children, that's pre-verbal, were attuned to the fear that their parents were feeling. And the only way they could express it was through crying, pre-verbal. He held that in, and he says that that is why he exhibits certain addictive characteristics. He too is looking to fill that hole in his heart, so he feels safe. And I thought that was like, talk about generational, it was like, he was 2. How could he say the war affected him? Well, guess what? It does.
Yeah.
That's, adoption. How do kids know they were adopted? It was like happened before they were able to talk. It affects them. It's incredible.
It's incredible what the brain does with the information before we even are even conscious to really what's going on around us. Like what the brain takes in and what the brain is trying to do at such an early age that it doesn't know what to do with it. And,
it stores it.
It stores it, and it believes that there are these things out there, these things and feelings out there that are out to like physically hurt us. Hence that's where the name No Lions Here comes from, is my brain thought that these feelings were physical threats on my life, and that we needed to go into fight and flight mode and numb ourselves out. And then comes in pornography to your early age. Like, oh, that feels good. Whatever it was. I can still remember the first like pornographic images that I saw at I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. Or even I remember one point in time I was in the back of the car. We had just bought a new pillow, right? And on the pillowcase was a picture of a lady in like a little nightie with her head resting on the pillow. And I remember just sitting there staring at that going, I like that. She looks good. And I remember getting made fun of it by my brothers. I can still remember to this day being like, Alex is looking at that for too long. And being like, no, I'm not. But like, and my brain says, oh, that feels good. An attractive woman in little clothing, that feels good. So let's go back to that place whenever we're hurting or need to regulate ourselves. And so realizing that like, oh wow, this is how a lot of this started. Okay, yeah, it was just a maladaptive coping mechanism.
Yeah. And maladaptive. Of course, we're going to figure out something that fits for the age category we're at. The 2-year-old cried. The 5-year-old may discover masturbation. The 15-year-old may, start fantasizing about the newest K-pop band. It's just according to whatever age classification they are at the time. But it would be very, very advantageous if we kind of taught them another way.
Yeah. And kind of bringing it back to like the enmeshment stuff. I knew growing up I had a lot of fear. I knew that my mom was there for me. However, like I didn't feel safe. It didn't feel safe. And so it was really confusing because I was like, okay, things are taken care of me. Things are taken care of around me, right? Like, again, clothes on my back, food. I've got to ride to sports and pick up from school. My mom's going to be there. But yet, like, I really wasn't able to count. Looking back on it now, it's almost like I really wasn't able to count on her to keep me safe. And that's because what I know now is kind of like the roles had kind of been reversed, and that I was there to serve her needs instead of her serving my needs. And that my needs just didn't get met, which then leaves me as a child just so confused. I remember being so confused growing up. So many different messages and just like so much confusion.
Boy, oh boy, let's get right down to the point. you just like sharpen that pencil and put a point right on it. And so that is exactly what I thought for some time until I linked the behavior of a love addict. Mm. So you understand the concept of a love avoidant and a love addict, right? Mm-hmm. And they're always the same person.
Yeah. Would you mind just like kind of expanding on just a love avoidant and a love addict just real quick, just so we have that?
And it's often considered a dance. And Pia Mellody explains this in her book, Facing Love Addiction. So first, the love addict enjoys the romance, the getting someone interested, the ritual of the pursuit, the going after somebody and attracting them, pulling them in, meeting their needs. This is the key for a child. A mother meets a child's needs. The moment that object of the love addict starts saying, nah, I'm not interested in you anymore. I want to go play with my friends. No, and I'm speaking as a child. Nah, Mom, enough. I want to be my own person. Natural growth that should be expected of a 10, 11, 12-year-old. Mm-hmm. Perfectly normal, except you're dealing with a love addict. Mom, me. Once a love addict realizes the object of her affection is starting to leave and starting to become avoidant, she wants more of that. Mm. She's saying, oh, what I'm doing is not working. I need more. I have to do more. I have to tie his shoes at 15. I have to make sure he has all coordinating clothes. I have to make sure, he's going to the best camp. I have to make sure I show him all the love I can show him so he doesn't leave me, which is really the key to everything, which, the love addict doesn't want anyone to leave. Yep. And so that's the end of it. Now, the love avoidant is not necessarily you as the child, but if it was a male-female thing, the love addict, once the love addict comes to a point, oh, I've got this person, they're in my, under my control, it's boring. I don't have to pursue my ritual of seduction anymore. I think I'll look somewhere else where I can get that dopamine rush of seduction. That's the all of a sudden now I'm avoiding that object of my love and pursuing something else. That's the love avoidant. But the love addict, when they come across someone that's avoiding their love and disappears, they come back. They zoom in on that person 10 times more. And that's the enmeshed mother. That's me. I'm afraid of losing my drug of choice. Just to, boil it right down to pure fact.
Yeah, that's definitely what it comes down to.
Where, quite honestly, you're supposed to fly. die. You're supposed to grow up. You're supposed to leave mom.
Yeah.
And mom was ignoring that.
Yeah. Yeah. The autonomy of self is something that like I've seen a lot coming in searching around in the enmeshed field of like I didn't get that opportunity to separate from mom to figure out who I was, what I liked, where Alex started and Alex ended, So now later on in life, and thankfully, thanks to recovery, I'm getting a chance to learn that now. But yeah, looking back, I really think about, oh yeah, like a lot of my views and opinions on life or politics or whatever it is tend to come from my parents, because I did not have that chance to separate from them. They did not really give me that opportunity to learn who I was. And so now, as a grown man, 35 years old, I'm just looking here going, who am I? What do I like? What do I want? And not what do they want from me? And I know that there were definitely some aspects of my family life growing up where it wasn't like, oh, you need to go to college and be a doctor or a lawyer. Like there was some like, hey, do what you want to do type of stuff. But because I didn't have that separation at that earlier 10, 11, 12 years old, I got to that point where it was like, all right, you got to figure out college and a job. And I was like, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what I want to do. Now, thankfully, I'm getting an opportunity to see that and to do that. But yeah, separating who we are from how we grew up, I know for myself, that was like a really big thing for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely like to do more of a deep dive into that particular time period. And it's funny that you say you were 35 because you're the same age as my son. Oh my God. But the certain point of, what his father and I had in mind for him to achieve is totally different from what he is doing. And it's like, why were we pressing so hard for him to, just do whatever you want, do whatever you want. Whereas I have also heard psychiatrists and therapists say, no, that's the last thing you should do. And I'm like, I don't know what's right. So that's why I'm saying I'd really like to do a deep dive on what's happening with this generation and what worked out. Some people have said saying, oh, you have to love what you do and that'll be the best thing for you. Some people have said that was the worst advice, and other people have said, which I believe, is you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. It's like that was the worst thing you could do. And so that's, I'd like to find out what is the best advice maybe the next generation can benefit.
Yeah, that like going back to like that balance, right? Like I don't know. I don't have kids yet. Like that is definitely, I would like a child at some point in time of my own, so that I can pass along the things that I'm learning. But yeah, looking back on it, like I wasn't given freedom to explore, and which made me want to rebel. Like, oh, you're not giving me an opportunity to explore these things that other people are doing right now. I also grew up in a very religious-based household, which was very much like fear-based. Like very, very fear-based. Sin is bad. If you sin, you're going to hell. Now, again, those weren't necessarily like the beliefs that, because I've had some conversations with my mom about this, and it wasn't so much like their beliefs. It was the church telling them these things. And, you know, because I've talked to my mom recently about this, and she's like, Alex, looking back on it, like, you know, we were so wrong. What the church was telling us and how to raise our kids, it was so wrong. I wish I wouldn't have listened to them. Now, would I still be an enmeshed man even if they didn't listen to the church? Yeah, I probably still would be. But growing up in that environment, like, we weren't allowed to do things that like other normal kids were doing and their parents were allowing them to do. So for me, it basically brought on this, well, wait, Timmy's over here. He said a couple cuss words, and he's not burning in hell right now. So I kind of want to use some cuss words too. Can I try some cuss words? Like, but that was so forbidden. You know, these normal kid things were so like forbidden to do in our household that like it was almost like a challenge. Like, all right, watch me go do these things because I want to explore. Right? As kids growing up, we want to explore. It's natural for us to want to explore and go out and find our way. But, you know, I feel like I didn't really get that opportunity, and I was doing things out of spite and rebellion because I wasn't allowed to do just normal things. So I think finding that balance between, hey, I want good for my kid, but I also want to let them find their own way.
And I think, you know, everyone is in that phase, whether you're 35 or whether you're 65, we're always comparing ourselves to other people. You know, where am I in relationship to Mr. Jones? Or where am I in relationship to my neighbor or my college roommate or blah, blah. And what I do realize is that you mentioned it before, autonomy is very important. When you have confidence that you're exactly who you are and can achieve what you want to achieve, then you are in the right place, whether you're 35 or whether you're 65. And I have to say, you know, all of my friends are looking at me and saying, Melissa, you're doing what? You're starting a business? You're 65 years old. Why are you starting a business? Why are you getting involved? This is the biggest business that, you know, we were talking. And I was like, I'm totally on board with what I'm doing. I have no interest in going on a Viking cruise. It's like, that's me.
Yeah.
And that's them. And I am totally not with them. I can visit them, you know, once a year and say hi, you know, but I'm not living in a 65-year-old mindset. I'm living in my mindset.
Yeah.
And my mindset is driving what makes me happy.
Yeah.
And if I could instill that in anyone, whether 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, that the autonomy of self is what is very important. You are okay. What you want, you can achieve. Go do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a freeing place to be when, you know, the mind lines up like that. And it's a really confident place to be too, of knowing that like, okay, I know who I am. I know what I want. I don't want to do that. And I think that part of my enmeshment kind of, it took me out of that, takes me out of that mindset. Whereas I'm living for somebody else and I'm not living for myself. Where do I need to be? I need to be living for myself. And what do I want to do? What do I want out of life? How do I get there? What can I do for myself instead of, okay, well, what do I need to do to, you know, settle the relationship between my mom and my brother who are button heads right now? What can I do to insert myself in and kind of become the middleman for those two? Instead of being like, you know what, that's their problems. That's not my problems. I'm out of it. Please don't bring this up to me. I'm out of it. And that's definitely something that I struggle with today. And that's why I think that family dynamics are really, honestly, they're the hardest relationships in my life when it comes to recovery and like working through them, because there's so much history and so many layers there when it comes to our family of origin that it makes them really difficult to navigate.
And again, you sharpen the pencil and you put right there the point. So, as a mother, the most important thing for me is to make sure that my son never got hurt. And that meant everything from falling down off his bike. Now, as a 35-year-old, he doesn't even own a bicycle. I think that's unbelievable. But that's because I was like, I never took the training wheels off. I never took his training wheels off. And I'm using that as a metaphor, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It was like, and so there is a certain very positive thing for falling. And that's how to learn to get up.
Yeah.
And I robbed my son of that. And so whether he's going to fall and get up at 35 or 45 or 55, so be it. That's going to be better than a master's degree.
Yeah.
And it's something that I cannot protect him from, nor can I help him get up. And I wish that I had allowed that to happen when he was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But I can't change that either. All I can do is reinforce the fact that he can get up.
Yeah.
And I recount how many times I fell myself and just, say every single time it was like so worth the fall. So worth the fall.
Yeah. When we fall, that's where we learn.
And why? That's how I learned. And why I sought so hard to protect him. I was actually damaging, scientifically, when we hurt ourselves. Perfect example, when you're told not to touch a hot stove. Yeah, you might listen, but nothing does better than touching a hot stove. All of your skin is one of the biggest organs in your body. All of the nerve receptors in your skin go up into your brain and create a glutamine response saying, never touch a hot stove. And then that message sends that message every other part of your brain, everything that has to do with motor skills, executive functioning, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes permanent. Mom saying, don't touch a hot stove goes in the auditory. Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the kid has to use executive functioning to say, I got to remember that. But it gets cemented by going through that process of learning. And it gets cemented by touching a hot stove. And that is the experiential knowledge that is so important to brain development in a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the hot stove reference. I mean, there's so many hot stoves growing up, obviously metaphorically, not actual stoves that I was told not to touch, but they didn't tell me why, right? There was no reasoning behind. It was just, don't do that. And it was like, well, I'm again, back to my, little Timmy over here, he's touching that hot stove and he seems to be fine. Well, I kind of want to touch the hot stove too. And then when I would touch the hot stove, I would get, just shut down, in trouble, punished. And it was like, okay, with no explanation behind it, right? Like there's no explanation, no talking. It was because I said so. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing stronger than the glutamate saying, don't touch a hot stove. Right. That's your brain saying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. So back to some of the kind of the enmeshment stuff. What was some of the work that you found that you had to do for yourself in order to kind of come to terms and to heal that within yourself?
Well, I shared with you the psychiatric end of it that just started opening that book. The other part was me expressing the shame and the guilt, guilt over doing that to my son. And at least guilt is you want to rectify that situation. So again, the same learned therapist that I had for like 15 years until he retired said, "Don't worry, Melissa, there's going to be a time that he is going to be with a therapist and he's going to call you in and he's going to say, 'Mom, I want you to sit down and talk to me.'" And, yeah, it was a long time, but fortunately it happened. And it was very positive, and I look forward to that opportunity every chance. But to be honest with you, nothing really helped as much as sharing my story. And the more times I shared my story in the rooms of other sex and love addicts, the fact that I was a perpetrator to my son and emotionally enmeshing him, did I start to release that shame. And as I said in the beginning, was able to take responsibility for my actions. And once that started happening, I started to heal and find ways of healing. Some of them followed the 12-step program, like, oh man, if I have to say, do a 10th step with my son, boom, 24 hours, I'm saying I'm sorry or making some sort of, change in my life to be able to rectify that and communicating that information to him because life's not perfect.
Right.
We still get into altercations and stuff like that. And so for the interesting aspects of the healing process, the 12-step programs have been, the tenets of the 12-step programs have been extremely important for me. And sharing my story and making sure that when I am wrong, I promptly admit it.
Yeah, I think I think that's huge for us. Absolutely. You talked about, you knew that, your therapist told you, "Hey, Melissa, one day you're going to get that call and you're going to get asked to go and sit down, with your son in a therapy type session." What was that first day like for you?
Actually, the first day was really totally uneventful.
Really?
Nothing deep, total facade.
Hmm.
The third session was intense because it was in treatment. I spent 3 days in family sessions. So the first session was, "Hello, how are you? Mom, I want to talk about this." Da, 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 da. I took it all in. And I'm like, all right, all right. Next session, there was kind of a conversation. We started scratching on the surface. Third session was like, let's crack this egg. And realizations came to me how much my actions had impacted him in context with the surround of his life. He was 11, going through puberty. You go through puberty starting at 11, going through, because of the divorce, change of schools, going through finding out his best friend was gay. Things I had no idea impacted him. And so that continued enmeshment, you talked about, there's a certain point you had to say enough. That he was very quiet about the enmeshment up until the separation. After the separation, he became adamant. Enough, Mom. And that's when the rebellion started. And it made sense to me because I never knew the backstory. I never knew about his confusion about his best friend. His best friend was a homosexual, and him questioning his sexuality, his abandonment issues of all of his friends, and moving into a new location, his abandonment of his mother, his father, the splitting of the households.
Mm.
And you would think that I would be attuned to that. I mean, I'm in the field. That's why you never become your own doctor. Talk about blinders. But for the most part, I was not at all aware of the thoughts. And on top of it, he said he was bullied. And that was, then he lost all his self-esteem. Was out the door for his entire high school, 4 years.
Wow. Did you find yourself at all in hearing these things about this, wanting to defend yourself at all? Or were you already kind of in this space of like, all right, you know what, I need to just sit and listen?
Worse. What did I do? I went right back to that enmeshment behavior, and I wanted to defend him. Whoa. Talk about a total relapse there. Yeah, that was my first. Well, what can I do to help you?
Yeah.
He was 30 years old. Oh, my poor little baby, treating him like a 12-year-old. Yeah. He was doing exactly what he was in treatment. He was doing exactly what he needed to do. He was talking about it. He didn't need my help at all. But what he did need me to say is I accept responsibility, which fortunately I had been waiting for that time, and I had been doing a lot of work on that. So I was able to accept my responsibility for it.
Yeah.
And I even shared in one of my printouts from sharing my story. I think on the inspiration line, I had shared my story, and I shared a printout at that meeting of that first story. And, I think that was enough, but I was quite shocked at how I reverted right back to that mother who enmeshes.
Yeah.
Immediately.
And I think that that's a great reminder of how, even with all the work that we do on ourselves, those things are still there. Right? Like they're still there. They're still there, not far below the surface, lurking, ready to jump out and say, "Hey, I got us. I know what to do. No matter how far along in recovery you are, or the work you've done on yourself, it's always still kind of there.
Well, because it is, by doing that, it's a rush. It's right away by helping others. That's another neurochemical rush. So, and actually, from one of my, I'm looking here at some notes I had for a seminar, how to hack dopamine and endorphins. It's an endorphin. So, what did I want? Well, let me just substitute the endorphin that I got from that feeling. Oh, I want to smoke some crack. I was feeling anxiety. I was feeling stress. So in my fantasy, I created a thought that created an endorphin rush to calm me down.
Yeah.
Or I could have just, substituted for a drug or some kind of substance, alcohol, any. But you see, that's what's so cunning and baffling about our addiction is our drug dealer is up here.
He's up there. She's up there
too. It was like, just created. Let me get that endorphin rush, and that's exactly what I went to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of
Cunning
sense.
And
yes, it is, absolutely. So what does the relationship look like with your son today? after the work that you guys, sounds like, you've obviously you've done your work. Sounds like he's been doing his work. What does that relationship look like for you two today?
Well, it just so happens that I'm living in, he and his father co-own a bunch of properties, apartments, and I'm living in one of his apartments. I'm a tenant of his.
Okay.
And I kind of said, hey, listen, when I sold the house that he grew up in and I was looking around, I said, the best thing I can do for my son is give him $1,200 a month and be a real good tenant. And so, still being an enmeshed mother, but I kind of wanted to do that instead of, giving it to some kind of other apartment
Sure.
complex, because I wasn't going to buy it. I didn't want to go there. And so that I see him on a regular basis. I see him once a week. And there's, I'm spending Thanksgiving with him. He is a great chef. He's, cooks all the time. And I really have a much, much better relationship. It's improved significantly since he went for treatment. He did not go for treatment for sex addiction. He actually went for internet.
Oh.
And that proved, again, it doesn't really matter what substance or behavior you're doing, it's all based on the same thing. It's self-medication of untreated trauma.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that helped him. He could resolve a lot of those issues that I discussed. And some of them were me oriented, some of them were exterior. Sure. But it was more helpful that he resolve those as an adult and not revisit as a child in an adult body. So that, knowing that he did that, made me step back, especially because of my background, knowing so much about how trauma work can help someone. I felt he was in his own autonomous self, and he didn't need someone to take care of him anymore. So that made me really conscious of stepping back. And that is the part of love and empathy that kind of brings us full circle. Because yes, I love him, but understanding his path and what he's trying to do is empathy.
Yeah.
And so I needed to learn more about empathy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can learn from empathy and learning more. I think it's one of those journeys that just part of like our journey. It's not over until we're in the grave, that we're always just, there's always going to be more searching and more work that needs to be done, right? Like recently I kind of referred to my recovery as like road maintenance. Right? They're always working on some road, right? And to me, that's kind of like recovery. Is sometimes there's potholes that are going to need to be filled. The lines are going to need to be repainted. Like, doesn't mean I have to do a complete overhaul on the roads, but there's always maintenance that needs to be done. And again, for me, again, kind of full circle, like it's not so doom and gloom anymore. It's like, okay, like I got an opportunity to improve these pathways that I'm traveling on, that is only going to make things better for me in the long run. Yeah.
So true.
Thank you so much for like sharing all that with me. Like I really appreciate just your willingness to come on and talk about this, because you mentioned there's a lot of shame and guilt there, and I think that anybody in recovery, in their story, like that is what's the underlying thing, is there's so much shame and guilt. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with me around this, around enmeshed relationships. And I think that it's something that needs to be talked about a little bit more, honestly, because I think that a lot of people are affected by it. And I know one of Ken Adams' stats is 40% of sex addicts, male sex addicts, are mother enmeshed men.
And actually, that struck me because I reread his book, but sharing in the rooms, what I also realized, and there are far fewer women in the rooms, but from the women that have responded, both to me and the rooms, as well as me sharing on the inspiration line, that there are also women who have experienced being daddy's little girl.
Yep.
And that is enmeshment of the daughter from the father and has its own characteristics. And so, I was really amazed, and not that I know how a father feels, but one thing I do realize is that hole in our heart. It exists for me, and it exists for you. It exists for everyone in the rooms, whether they're an alcoholic, whether they're a sex addict, or whether they're a gambler. That filling that hole in the heart is ever present. And perhaps this podcast can help men and women understand their parent a little bit better and find a little bit of room to forgive them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the disclaimers that, is that I don't blame my mom. I love my mom. I know my mom was trying to do the best that she could with what she had for me and my brothers. She was alone. My dad was not there emotionally, mentally, physically. He was there, but he was not meeting her needs the way that she needed them met. And so, the disclaimer is that, like, I love my mom. I do not blame her. Do I have my grievances? Do I have my resentments? I do. And thankfully with the 12 steps and the work that I'm doing, I will work through those. But at the end of the day, I do love my mom, and I do really appreciate what she's done for me and the things that she tried to do for me, and that they were out of love. They were not malicious at all. She was not trying to hurt me or do anything like that. It was all out of love. She just didn't know how to go about it in the right way. So that's definitely, I want to throw that out there, because this isn't a, grab your pitchforks and let's go cruise. I don't want to do that. I want to give her credit, and that I do love her. So, Mom, if you're listening,
Just in case.
just in case. And I think that that's an important part, that, we don't need to blame, because it's easy to blame, right? It's easy to blame somebody else for my problems. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to blame. I don't want to blame. I do want to look at what happened, but I don't want to blame. I don't want to blame. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also the amount of recovery that you have, that is a testament to your enlightenment. A new person just coming into the program might be this might be totally new to them. So this podcast may be a very, very good and important first conversation that they've never heard before.
Yeah, that's very true, and I do get some feedback around that, and I'm really grateful that, that I have this platform, and that I have amazing guests like you that are willing to come on and talk about this stuff with me, because again, I think that there needs to be more light shed on this, and whatever I can do to spread the message, whether you're a newcomer or been in the program for 20 years, like, whatever I can do to spread the message, that's what I want to do, and it really helps me too, It really, really helps me wanting to, my core need of being seen and heard. Well, what did I do with it? I just decided to go and start a podcast.
What a megaphone.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Here's my soapbox. Let me stand on it. Podcasts are just the modern day soapboxes. Before I let you go, I do have, I have a question for you from a listener. Talking about this guy and obviously we don't know what's going on in his, but basically his recovery is organically changing, right? I know early on in recovery, I was really big into, and it sounds like he was too, the literature. How do I fill my time? Okay, let me add in, let me check out all this addiction literature and let me do this research. Well, as we both know, recoveries change. They evolve and they move around to where maybe we don't need as much addiction literature, but how can we fill that unstructured time to find new ways of exploring, I guess, ourselves and what we can do for ourselves that's not so much based in recovery?
Well, so it may not be recovery literature, but find out more. I mean, you mentioned Ken Adams, Married to
Yep, there it
Mom.
is. Great book.
You
Great
know,
book.
his book, that was like, I just so happened to have it, you know. And there's, so many other pieces of literature that are out there that can help you learn more about yourself, that don't have a 12-step support program stamp on it. One of the most informative things that I have read are the autobiographies of people in recovery, whether it be, an autobiography of a person that is an alcoholic or an addict, or, a sex addict. It doesn't matter. It's how they learned. And as I said before, the Japanese proverb, fall 7 times, get up 8. How they got up from, a devastating slip or a devastating failure, or as everybody calls it, rock bottom. And those kind of books or pieces of literature, movies, are so much more informative. And I did devour all of the books that were available, and whether it was NA, SA, SAA, SLAA, AA, I read all of them. But then I really got involved in other books that talked about by professionals, or talked about people in recovery themselves. I already mentioned Pia Melody's book, Facing Love Addiction, was monumental for me discovering love addiction, because in my program, even though it was called SLAA, the L part of it was really not well documented. And I mentioned one of the most important pieces of program literature is SAA's 3 circles. And they talk about outer circle behaviors, and there's inner circle, and that's the bottom lines, things that you absolutely cannot do. Middle circle behaviors, which are those things that you do but could lead to inner circle behaviors, high risk factors. And then there's outer circle behaviors, those things that you love to do, the things that are tremendously successful. And one thing that we do realize in addiction is we spend a lot of time on the addiction, a lot of time, much more than we can even think we spent time on. So if that disappears, nature abhors a vacuum. You've got to fill that space, or the addiction is going to come rushing back. As they say, it's doing push-ups in the parking lot. And if you don't fill that with something, whether it be reading, recovery literature of any source, picking a hobby, finding a new career, going back to school. In your case, you started studying to be a recovery coach. You opened up a podcast that was focused around recovery. Whatever you need to do to fill that time is going to benefit your recovery. So whatever you do, fill that time with a non-addictive behavior. That's why there's so many new PhDs. That's why there's so many new musicians, so many new artists, so many new podcasters out there, because this is productive use of time, much more productive than the addiction.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like,
so that's my only advice to your reader or your listener is whatever you do, fill that time
Yeah.
with positive
Yeah.
things.
And it may take some times where you just got to kind of sit with yourself and ask yourself, what do I like to do? What do I enjoy doing? Okay. And then that gives a list of, okay, where I can at least start on what I want to do. Because I know that I've had to do that before for me on myself too, is how do I fill this time? What do I want to do? Because it can't be recovery 24/7. So I think that helps a lot, actually, just trying to find ways to fill that time that you enjoy with things that you enjoy doing that are not addictive.
And they say in all the time, in all areas of our lives. So after 20 years in the program, actually that's just 20 years in the S program. I have 35 years in drug and alcohol. What I do realize is recovery has become a way of life. As I said, I do a 10th step all the time. It's a way of life for me. I call it a 10th step. Other people just call it, oh, I had to say I'm sorry. It's a way of life. It's the right thing to do. So recovery for me has become my way of life after 35 years of living in, like, yeah, I can identify as being a Jew, or I can identify as being a Catholic, or I can identify as being a Muslim. But really, I identify spiritually to the 12-step program. That's how I live my life. The 12 steps are like the 12 commandments.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It really is. And inspirational too, because that's how I would like to view my life, as my recovery is my lifestyle. Because I know for me, it's so easy, it would be so easy for me to stray from the path if I don't live this and make recovery a way of life. So easy. The ditch is, no matter how far no matter where I'm at on the road, the ditch is the same distance away from me. No matter how far I drive.
That might be a little intense. It might be a little intense for a person just in recovery to hear that. But, it's something that, I came from a very unstructured life, and it works for me. And hearing it from you, coming from a very structured upbringing, it works for you. So, hey, maybe it works, more times than not.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation today, and this isn't the last time we're going to see you either. We'll definitely we're going to stay in touch, and I'm definitely going to keep having you back on. Now, whenever I stop recording, I'm going to edit this part out, but when I stop recording, I will need you to stay on the call for just a couple minutes so that virtually it can all upload. So I'll go through my ending spiel here, and then when I actually stop recording, then we'll stay on the call for just a couple more minutes after that. So,
okay.
But Melissa, thank you again. Just I can't say it enough. I always find myself overthinking people, but it means a lot to me, because what I'm doing here means so much to me, and it means so much and I'm so grateful that I have people that are willing to come on, share their stories, and just talk recovery with me. So Melissa, thank you so much for coming on again. I really appreciate it. And where can the people find the work that you're doing?
So if they go to my website, which is mkrecoverycoaching.com, that's M is in Melissa, K is in Killeen, recoverycoaching.com.
Awesome. Go check out some of the stuff she's doing over there. Great work. You're doing awesome stuff, Melissa, and I'm excited to see, more about some of the opportunities that you got going forward.
Thank you so much.
Melissa. Thank you.